I'm 24 now, but remembered this recently, and was telling my boyfriend this story about a week ago. When I was around 16 years old, a friend and I stayed over a mutual friend's house. I live in a somewhat rural area, so there are houses around, but it's not very crowded. About a half a mile or so from my friend's house, there was access to a swimming area. I think we called it coma water because it was kind of dank, and hey, we were silly kids and we thought it was hilarious. But we threw on our bikinis anyway and headed down to the coma water. As the three of us walked through the field alongside a residential road behind our friend's house on our way to swim, we noticed a black sedan with two older men that we'd never seen before, possibly in their 30s or 40s, drive past us and slow down. We shared a look of disgust and thought the standard, creepy old men, that girls get used to thinking from a very young age, but we didn't dwell on it. We swam for about an hour and a half and then decided to go back. We left talking and laughing and took the same route home, past a cluster of houses. We made it less than halfway back when we saw reverse lights turn on down a subsidiary road. We all looked to see the same black sedan pull out and start driving towards us, and we froze. I don't know who finally broke. It may have even been me, but one of us screamed. "Run back!" Up ahead was an open field. To our left was an open field, and to our right the car was approaching. Going back was our only option. We ran as fast as we could in our bikinis and flip-flops and knocked on the first door that we found. An older couple on their way to church opened the door and we breathlessly begged them to help us, knowing that the car would still be waiting for us if we tried to walk or even run back. They were taken completely off guard, but eventually agreed to put towels down on their back seat and drive us back up to my friend's house. As an adult now, I'm sure that they were scanning the area for anyone suspicious, but I pretty much blacked out during the car ride from the adrenaline. They made sure that we got into the house safely and we locked every possible entrance before calling the police. A state trooper came by about an hour later to take a statement from us. Our story and description of the men in their car lined up with the recent abductions of teenage girls our age in the area. The cop didn't say it directly, but we were lucky that we were together and aware of our surroundings and got out unscathed. I tried to find articles to corroborate this, but I didn't have any luck. And this was because there were too many abductions to sort through. Many people, when speaking of our society today, say that children are less safe than they have ever been before. Personally, I believe that no matter what year it is, we are always going to have horrible people running around on the streets. I think that evil is just a part of human nature. Maybe I read too many stories, but still, all the parents out there, keep a close eye on your kids. All of that aside, this particular encounter happened about 22 years ago when I was 3. My brother was a newborn at the time, and for financial reasons, my mum, stepdad, who later adopted me and became the man I consider my father, my brother and I, all lived with my mother's parents. It was never a bad situation, but I think my mum grew frazzled quite easily trying to raise 2 children and also save up enough money for a house of her own. That's why we spent most of our time at lakes and parks. Any sort of free activity that would wear us out, I believe. Back then, my grandmother was in pretty good health, and I remember she drove my mum, my new brother, and me to a small lake in Denver for a fun weekend trip. I don't know why I remember all this information so well. Again, I was only 3, but I was already dressed up in a pink bathing suit and was chatting animatedly about going swimming to my childhood teddy bear. That is, until my brother started to fuss and I plugged my ears to drown out the noise. When we arrived at the lake, my grandma and mum were visibly exhausted from the crying, and they quickly let me out of my car seat, They both told me to wait by the car while they comforted and fed my little brother, and I obeyed as they disappeared around the other side. I was just watching the waves on the lake. I've always loved swimming, and fiddling with my bear when two guys approached me from across the parking lot. Again, I don't know why I remember this so well, but the men were fairly young, maybe in their early 20s, and were dressed in baggy jeans and hoodies. I think that they were both Caucasian as well, if that matters at all. I did get an immediate stranger danger vibe from them, and I remember pressing myself up against my grandma's car as though that would provide me protection or something. I was a pretty cautious child anyways. This was not the first weird encounter that I'd had with a stranger ever, but the instant terror I felt when these guys approached me caught me off guard. "Hey, little girl," one of the guys said, leaning down so that he was in my face. "Do you want $1?" I didn't say anything, and my limbs froze. I could not even move when the other man pulled out a $1 bill. The first man spoke again. "It's okay. If you get into our car, we'll give you $1." He started grabbing at my arm, and I remember that I started to cry. However, I was so scared that I couldn't move or make a sound, so my tears were silent. "Don't cry, little girl. We'll give you $1, the man said, and he started to pull my arm, dragging me towards a dirty white van that scared me even more. The other man started to tell me that they were going to make me rich. I was going to earn more money than any other little girl would ever have, and I could then buy any toy I wanted if I just went into the van. When we were about halfway to the van, I dropped my teddy bear. Mr. Bear still actually sits on my bed, in fact, and that's when I let out an audible scream. The men, they didn't seem too concerned, until my grandma came out from behind her car and charged the men. She was carrying a baby bottle from feeding my brother, and she used that to begin beating the men. After a few choice words that I'd never heard her use before or since, the men let go of me, and with dejected faces, they ran into the van and just sped off. After that, my grandma gave me my teddy bear back and carried me to my mum, where they calmed me down and called the police. After talking to me and wondering out loud how my grandma, a 70-year-old, very, very tiny woman, beat up two young males, she even had some blood under her nails from scratching at them, my mum and grandma decided that it was best just to go home and try the lake again another day. I don't know if the men were ever caught, but I sincerely hope that they were. Something tells me that whatever they wanted with a cute blonde 3-year-old girl was not good. My grandma, she unfortunately doesn't remember this story now. She has dementia, but she will forever remain a hero of mine. But my mum and I like to tell her and remind her that she's the bravest, kindest woman that we've ever known. Again, this was 20 years ago, but I would really implore any parents out there to make sure that their kids are safe. There are some sick, sick people out there, and that fact is never going to change, even with time. This was not the first time I was almost kidnapped too, but it was definitely the most scared I've ever been. And it was also the closest. This happened around a decade ago when I was your quintessential angsty, weird little teenager, quite moody and angry at the world. Ironically, I think that is what ultimately saved me, but the guilt doesn't leave me. I have never fully shared this with anyone before, so bear with me. My family lived in one of the nicer neighborhoods of my city, and unfortunately muggings weren't uncommon. Though, to my knowledge at the time, none had resulted in anyone's death. I wasn't really following the neighborhood news, or any news really. I could tell that my mother was getting increasingly worried about the past few months though, but I just didn't care enough to ask why. She kept reminding me to lock all the doors, travel in groups, not to talk to strangers, yada yada yada. The same spiel most responsible parents give their kids. Only I took insult at being lectured weekly about safety at 16. Our first fight about this happened when I was told I was not allowed to walk home from the train anymore. I was taking some extracurricular lessons at the centre of the city and rode the train to the end of the line where we lived, which was in no way remote. Our apartment building was about a 10-minute walk from the station, and I had been doing that distance since I was little. I could literally do it with my eyes closed even. I usually walked around with my headphones on and my old and much beloved CD player on my back, listening to something loud and grungy, feeling completely safe in my little bubble of melodious solitude. There was lots of yelling and screaming, lots of, "You still treat me like a child, you don't trust me, you're suffocating me, you're taking away my freedom, you're the world's worst mother ever," drama. You get the idea. Eventually, we came to a compromise. As long as there was still light out, I could walk home. Otherwise, I'd give her a call and she would come and pick me up. I was fine with that, for the time. On that particular night, however, I was really, really angry. Don't ask me what about. I honestly don't remember the reason. I just remember the wrath. I wanted to scream bloody murder, and the feeling got even more exacerbated when I realized that I had to call Mummy to pick me up. No way was I doing that. It didn't matter that it was raining. I wasn't a baby or made of sugar. I got out of the train, ignored the heavy rain, and marched straight home. On the outside, I must have looked like a normal 16-year-old listening to some music while hurrying home. But on the inside, I was preparing to crush my enemies, see them kneeling before me, and hear the lamentation of their women. The way from the station to my home is pretty well lit, except for one turn. Back then, there were unkempt hedges on both sides of the corner, one in front of the abandoned lot, and no streetlights at all for about 100 feet. I approached the turn completely oblivious of my surroundings, internally planning my revenge against a yet unidentified foe, when someone jumped out beside me from the bushes, wielding a large kitchen knife. Most of what follows, I remember in a blur. I don't remember what he looked like. It was dark and he was wearing a hood. I remember he smelled strongly of medicinal alcohol, but I honestly don't recall him saying anything. He probably didn't have time to anyway, because when he jumped out of the shadows, I was so startled that I dropped my Discman. And that was it. I saw red and completely lost it on the guy. All of the day's frustrations poured out of me like a dam breaking, and I unleashed a torrent of swear words at him, most of which I made up on the spot. I completely ignored the knife, shoved him back hard, kept screaming, "Are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me right now?" over and over, and bent over to pick up my shattered CD player. I don't know what I did, and to this day, I don't know why he didn't attack me when I was crouched down, but when I gathered all the pieces and I stood up, he was nowhere to be seen. Holding the pieces of my broken Discman and CD, I continued my march home, muttering a variation of "Great, just great, that's just perfect. What else is going to happen today to make this an even shittier day?" And occasionally turning around to yell another "fuck you, man" at the general direction of the guy. When I got home, I got straight into a fight with a furious mother for not calling her, and made sure not to mention what happened out of fear that it would give credence to her side. The gravity of it all hit me in the shower, after the adrenaline had subsided, and yet I think I still cried more for my broken Discman than for realizing the danger that I'd put myself through, and what I had just survived. It all came crashing down on me 2 days later when one of my neighbours was found stabbed in the lot behind the hedge where I was attacked. I didn't know her that well. We went to Sunday school together, but my family and hers were neighbours for years. I overheard my mother talking on the phone about the serial killer that was making his rounds around the most affluent parts of the city, and how this was the latest in a series of muggings and stabbings in the area. I grew up in a large, dark and damn cliché of what everyone pictures a haunted house would look like. For more than 100 years, the house has loomed on the top of a hill lined with foreboding oak trees, where murders of crows would frequently stop. I have an older sister, 7 years older, who was a problem child, and very into the occult, demons and devil worshipping, and she would terrify my younger brother and I with stories and just the general way that she would look at us blankly. She wore black lipstick and dyed her hair black, and when she turned about 13, she became even more rebellious, and she would run away and be missing for weeks and months. She was the one who originally introduced my brother and I to a Ouija board. My mother was an alcoholic, mentally ill, and in charge of watching us kids while my dad worked the night shifts, and many times double shifts. To say that our home had a bad energy would be an understatement. We would later learn the dark history of our home from the 90-year-old woman across the streets. Mrs. Looker told us that our home was built as a home for unwed mothers, and so many births, deaths, and abortions, which at the time were very much frowned upon, happened there over the years. It served that purpose for about 20 years until it was forced to be shut down, and then was sold into a family who lived there until 1970, when my father bought it for an unbelievable price, according to him. And he still lives there today. The first prefacing experience is one that I only very vaguely remember, but my mum has told me in full detail many times, and my dad, who doesn't believe in ghosts, also corroborates. My mum was outside sunbathing and my sister was inside with a friend of hers. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a butter knife and was holding it in my fist with the tip pointed to the ground when I slowly walked into the living room where my sister was playing with her friend. I apparently had a blank look on my face and was shaking and kept repeating that Mummy needs help. She's fighting the devil across the street in a tunnel. My sister yelled for my mum and she came into the house and asked me what was wrong, and I just kept repeating, Mummy needs help. She's fighting the devil across the street in a tunnel. But my mum kept shaking me and telling me that she was right here and to snap out of it. She said that I was in that state for about an hour, where I was just staring off into nowhere, and finally I snapped back into reality and acted normal but didn't remember a thing. My mum was convinced that I was possessed or something. Later that night, when it was bath time, she noticed that I had 3 bad burn marks on my shoulder that, she says, looked like they were from the claws of a demon or something. It's also important to note that my mother was abandoned as a child and adopted, and has always been spiritual. I know that this might be hard for some to believe, but she says that she has experienced being saved by a guardian angel when she was young, and found herself too far away from her rural house at nightfall, and felt impending danger closing in on her. She can't explain what it was, but she knew that she was in danger and was scared. She closed her eyes and opened them, and she was all of a sudden on her front porch, which was hundreds of yards away from where she was. So, the next experience was from my younger brother's perspective. He is younger by a year and a half, and we shared a bedroom and bunk beds until I was 11. I slept on the top bunk and he was on the bottom. Our room was always extremely messy, with toys scattered all over the place. One morning, at about 4 a.m, my brother woke up and said that he saw Mum crouched down cleaning up the toys. He only saw her back and her hair, which was a mix of grey and dyed blonde. My mother always wore a long, light blue flowy nightgown to bed, which was easily recognisable. He didn't think anything of it and went right back to sleep. In the morning, when we both woke up, the room was spotlessly clean, and I asked him how that happened. He explained that he saw Mum in there cleaning in the middle of the night, and at breakfast we asked her why she cleaned our room. And needless to say, she told us that she'd never been in our room. She went in to look too and was amazed at just how clean our room was, since it was never like that. It was also around this time that my brother started getting frequent night terrors that would scare the living crap out of me. I'd wake up to him screaming, standing in the corner of the room facing the wall and banging his head off the wall. Sometimes he would be saying, "I'm sorry, God," over and over. Sometimes he would be sitting in the middle of the room with his knees to his chest, hands draped around his knees, rocking back and forth saying things that just didn't make sense while bawling his eyes out. My dad would come down the long dark hallway to our room and try and snap him out of it. Sometimes he would even slap him hard to see if he could get a reaction, but his demeanor would just never change. Eventually, my dad just said to leave him be because nothing seemed to snap him out of it. And as you can imagine, this was really scary as a kid. I'd wake up in a living nightmare, scared out of my mind, having to watch him do this for sometimes an hour straight until he would climb back into bed and just fall asleep. I remember one particularly scary episode when I woke up and he was sitting on the dresser, Indian style, with his back to the mirror, covering his eyes and crying, just saying, "No, I won't. You can't make me look." I would try talking to him, and sometimes he would respond, but with simple answers. I grabbed him by the hand and told him that we should go get some water. He got off the dresser and followed me to the bathroom, but refused to go in. I went in and turned the faucet on so that he could drink out of it, but he didn't want to go into the bathroom because of the mirror above the sink. I finally pushed him in and he looked at himself in the mirror and let out the loudest blood-curdling scream that I've ever heard, and was so frightened at his reflection that he just passed out. This continued for years, and would probably happen once every 2 or 3 months, and always in the wee hours of the morning. When I finally moved out of that room down the long hallway to the big bedroom around age 11, it was even more scary waking up down there, alone, hearing my brother's fits down the hall. A few more important details about this house that you'll need to know is that the electrical and plumbing system were really old and never updated. As a result, many lights would never work, including the most important one for me as a child, the light in the long dark hallway outside of my room, which connected to my brother's room, sister's room, and the only bathroom, which was straight down the hallway. When my brother was having his fits, I'd open the door and reach my hand out to flick the light switch on, but it would rarely work. If I wanted to go and check on him, I'd have to run down the hallway in the pitch dark, feeling the walls to get to his room. This was way worse. So many times I'd just be too scared and would just stay in my room with my light on. Now, the old plumbing and piping in the house meant that when you turned on a faucet, not only would it sometimes be a rusty red-coloured water for a few seconds coming out, which would then turn into clear normal-looking water, but there was a distinct whistle sound when it came out, which intensified with the stronger stream. Many times, I'd wake up down the hallway hearing the whistle and the water on full blast in the bathroom. I'd have to sprint down the pitch-dark hallway to flick on the bathroom light and shut off the faucet. Try to imagine that dread for a second. Not only do you have to sprint down the hallway toward the scary noise in the dark, but you think that anything could be in that bathroom when you flick the light on. And then I'd have to sprint down the hallway again to my room. The worst part is, after I would shut it off and get back to sleep, I'd wake up an hour later to the faucet on again. This happened intermittently for years too. My dad always said it was just my brother doing it to scare me, but he always denied it. This would also be a pretty elaborate hoax to pull for so many years. especially without me ever catching him. The last thing I want to preface before getting into the terrifying Ouija night, although I have a few more stories that I can tell if people are interested, regards one of my girlfriends in my adult years. I was dating a beautiful Venezuelan woman with long black hair. We dated for about a year before I learned of her childhood in Venezuela, where she gained local notoriety as an incredible, powerful medium. Some days, she claimed as many as 30 ghosts would be trying to communicate through her. It got so bad that her mother had to take her to Zimbabwe to a witch doctor, apparently, who was renowned for being able to reverse or suppress the powers that mediums have when it gets too overwhelming for them. I know, I didn't believe it either. But when I met her mother, she told me the whole thing and she cried while telling it. My girlfriend also showed me the scars on her ankles, knees and wrists. Tiny little slits that I never noticed before, where the witch doctor cut her to drain some blood for the ceremony. How did this topic of her being a medium come up? We were staying at a friend's house for this annual party when we were playing drinking games, hit up this pool and did a bonfire and then got gambling on horses. Everyone stayed in the house, but my girlfriend and I brought my new tent and blow-up mattress and stayed in the backyard. It was a pretty rural area, and this backyard adjoined to a big cornfield. In the morning, we were pillow talking, and I thought she was just trying to scare me when she said, "Hey, did you hear the little girl outside the tent last night?" I played along and said, "Yeah, that was creepy, right?" She said that she circled around the tent a few times and then ran into the cornfield. The whole day, I didn't think too much of it because I thought that we were just being playful, trying to scare each other in the morning. Later that night, though, I told my friend Mark, who owns the house, that my girlfriend said that she heard a little girl hanging around our tent. And his face went white as a ghost. He said, "Wait, how the hell do you know about this little girl? Are you serious?" And I said, "Wait, what are you talking about?" Apparently, there's some urban myth story on this street that a little girl who went missing decades ago in the cornfields sometimes comes out of them at night, and he always thought that it was bullshit. This is when I asked my girlfriend if she was being serious, and did she actually hear a little girl, and that's when she came clean with the whole medium backstory. She said after Zimbabwe that her powers weren't as strong, but that she would still get periodic ghosts that would try and talk to her. After I corroborated her crazy childhood medium story with her mum, I brought her to my dad's house where I grew up so that she could meet my dad, and she could only stay in that house for a few minutes before she had to leave. She said that the dread she felt in there was the most overwhelming sense of dread that she had ever had in her life, and she would never return. Okay, so finally, on to the Ouija board night. My brother is now 20 years old and I'm 22. My mum lives in a house in our small city's downtown area, and my brother spends a lot of his time there because she lets him drink and smoke weed and stuff. He had been there with his girlfriend playing the Ouija board all night when I got there after a night drinking with some friends. The door was locked and I knocked. He came flying down the stairs and swooshed open the curtain to see me standing there. He had the literal look on his face like he had just seen a ghost. I've never seen him this scared. He just tells me to come inside and I wouldn't believe what was going on. He says that he and his girlfriend have been playing the Ouija board and that they have this very strong evil spirit who calls himself AZ that has been talking to him all night. Apparently, he's AZ because he encompasses everything and is omnipresent. He said AZ has been spelling out, "kill mum," and saying evil things about her all night. She was sleeping in the room next door through it all. AZ was very sexual and vulgar as well. My brother said that he had knocked down a crucifix off the wall and opened and closed the bathroom door just a few minutes before I got there. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up because I believed my brother, and I felt this ominous sense of dread. But I didn't have proof, and I hadn't seen anything with my own eyes yet. I watched them playing, and the planchette was whipping around the board, answering questions quickly. AZ fixated on me and started spelling out, "brother." My brother asked if he wanted to talk to me, and AZ said no. He asked if he liked me, and AZ said no. I then asked my brother to tell him that I don't believe in him and I need a sign. AZ spelled out, "die." He then asked if he was going to hurt me, and AZ said no, and then he spelled out, "mum." At that point, I went into my mum's room to make sure that she was okay, and she was. When I was in her room, I stubbed my toe and tripped a little bit. I came back out to the living room and told Dan that Mum was okay. My brother commanded him to leave my mother alone. He said that I wanted to see a sign. AZ then spelled out, "trip." I started to feel a little wave of energy come over me as I was thinking, did he just see my trip? My brother asked him what he means by trip, and I told him that I just stubbed my toe in my mum's room. Then I said, ask him if he could hear me, and I started addressing him myself. AZ said that he could hear me. I said if I write down a word on a piece of paper, would he be able to see it and spell it? He said maybe. I asked if he would do it. He said no. So I started to verbally abuse him a little bit, calling him a coward and a pussy, and that if he really wanted us to know that he was real, he would do it. The planchette started to fly around the board without stopping anywhere, but eventually spelled out short. I asked if he wanted me to write short words, and it replied yes. I went to the other side of the apartment with a piece of paper, and I wrote down C, S-E-A. I came back and my brother asked me if he saw what I wrote and to spell it. And the planchette slowly circled around the board and landed on S, and then it slowly went to E, and my heart raced, and I almost started crying from emotion. But then it landed on X. My brother asked me if I wrote down sex, and I said no and started to shake. My brother cursed at AZ, calling him a pervert and telling him to quit playing around, and the planchette promptly went to SEA, and I said, "Holy shit," out loud. And then the planchette slid off the board with a pretty strong force, and my mum's cat came running out of my mum's room to the living room, jumped on the couch and scrambled across it, then crawled under the table. It was obviously terrified of something. I have goosebumps every time I recount this. When my brother got AZ back on the board, I proceeded to keep playing the spelling game. Next, with ocean, then cream, and then 3 or 4 more words, and each time I would go to a different room and make sure that no one could see what I wrote, except for me, and I'd fold it and put it in my pocket. Each time I came back to the living room, AZ spelled out the words with ease, and faster each time too. I left that house, told my brother to be safe, and went to my friend's house up the road because there was no way in hell I was going back to my dad's house that night. I can't really explain the feeling you get when you know, without a doubt, that it's real, other than you're just overwhelmed with every emotion at the same time. Make no mistake about it, folks. They do, without a doubt, exist. I'm a freshman at college, and I've been rushing a fraternity while there. Now, before anyone gets any ideas, most fraternities in America are not what you hear about on TV. While those certainly do exist, and we even have 1 or 2 on my campus, The majority of frats are filled with good and cool guys. One of the things that drove me to the fraternity is that I felt like they actually wanted me there. I loved the sense of companionship and brotherhood that the active members seemed to have for one another. So, when spring hit and I was allowed to become a pledge, I did. I was really excited with this because I knew and liked all of the 14 guys who were pledging, 3 of whom were even my closest friends on campus, and I was happy that I'd get to become brothers and bond with all of them. This fraternity that I pledged with was officially a non-hazing one, although they did let us know going into it that there was going to be some light hazing, because in their eyes, going through that brought us closer together, and I wholeheartedly agreed with that. Every Thursday night, we would participate in things called rituals, which were usually quick things designed to teach us a lesson about what being in a frat meant. And one night, I suppose they succeeded. We went down into our basement, all 14 of us, and the actives were waiting for us. One of them stood up. He said to us, "Pledges, this is probably the most hazing that you'll ever have to do." He then proceeded to split us all into groups of 2, and they had us all remove any clothing which linked us to the college or the fraternity, as well as put on warm clothing and give up our phones. "We'll be taking you guys on an adventure, and you'll work with your partner to bring us something to eat, okay? Stick to the roads and you'll be fine. And don't come back until you find something." And with that, we all had to put bags on over our heads. 2 active members guided us to the cars, and they drove us somewhere. I was trying to mentally map where they were taking us, but they made a lot of unnecessary twists and turns in a clear attempt to confuse us. Eventually, I lost track of where we were as they went down a pathway that I was really unfamiliar with. After a little while, the car came to a stop. The actives helped me and my partner, a guy named Will, out of the car. They took the cloth bags off of our heads, and we were in the middle of nowhere, out on a country road, late at night. I turned to the actives, and they had those classic shit-eating smiles on their face. "You're going to want to walk down that way," one said while pointing. "And remember, don't come back till you bring us something to eat. And get creative. Don't bring us grass or some shit. Also, no processed food. Raw ingredients only." And with that, they got in their car and just drove off. Without much wait, Will and I started walking down the road, looking for anything that could have been edible. My first instinct was dandelions, because I knew from experience that you could turn these into a soup. Unfortunately, though, as it was still early spring, there wasn't much in terms of plant growth around, especially dandelions. Will and I spent a lot of the first part talking and joking around with one another. There weren't any houses for a long while, so we figured that we really didn't have to worry about noise or anything. Everything started out great. We figured out early that the guys that dropped us off would drive down the road every now and then, bathing us in the light of their high beams just to annoy us, and we would always return that kindness by raising our middle fingers. I did appreciate that they were clearly checking on us, though, to make sure that we were safe. I legitimately didn't feel scared at first, as I was with Will and the actives were still patrolling the roads to make sure that we were going the right direction. To be honest, I was just worried about finding something to eat. That's when we saw our first house with its lights still on, and I had an idea. "Hey, Will, why don't we just go up to one of those houses over there and ask them for some sort of raw ingredient?" Will shook his head. "Nah, no way, man. I'm not doing that. I'm black and they might get the wrong idea." I did understand what Will was saying there. We were in the middle of nowhere, and having 2 teenagers come up to the door in the middle of the night asking for raw ingredients might be misconstrued, especially when one of those teenagers was black in that day and age. I turned to Will and tried to persuade him on this, though, saying that nothing is really growing around here, so the only thing that we could probably bring back is roadkill, and I'd rather risk asking a stranger than lug the bloody rotting corpse of an animal back for several miles. Eventually, Will seemed to agree with me, although he insisted on staying out of sight. I jokingly called him a pussy, and we both went up to the house. I rang the doorbell once, and not even 10 seconds later, an older man, maybe in his 50s, opened the door. He was balding, a bit thin, and looked like he hadn't showered in days, as cliche as that all sounds. But the thing that really got me was how the creepy fucker was looking at me. He didn't seem like he was surprised or irritated to see me at all. Instead, he had this sort of almost half smile and just stared at me straight in my eyes, never breaking eye contact. "Good evening," he said in a creepy, somewhat higher-pitched voice. "What brings you here?" I immediately got the sense that we shouldn't have knocked on this guy's door. I'm sorry," I said. "I think we confused your house with somebody else's. Sorry to bother you." "Nonsense," the guy said. "Walking down here at night? You must have car troubles. It's okay. You can spend the night here and I'll take a look at your car in the morning." I continued to back up. No, it's okay, sir. We really don't need any help." For a brief second, I saw a flash of agitation across the man's face, before he returned to that creepy half-smile of his. "Honestly, it's no trouble. Come on in. I promise I won't hurt you or anything." At that point, Will stepped out from the side of the porch and into view. "Sir, it's okay. We really don't need any help," he said. The guy seemed a bit surprised that there were two of us, but not really disappointed. But I think with the increase in numbers and Will's "don't fuck with us" tone, the guy slithered back into his house, not saying another word. Quickening our pace, Will and we just got out of there. We saw the car with our actives in it pass by twice more before we found an evergreen tree, which was good because I knew that you could make tea from its branches. Having finally found our raw ingredient, our spirits were raised and we just began to forget about that guy. That is, until we saw headlights up in front of us. Now, we initially assumed that it was our actives again, but it came far too soon after their last pass, so there was no way they could have come around that fast. Additionally, the car that our actives were in had one of its headlights burnt out, and this one had both working fine. We didn't think too much of it at first, as we did see the occasional person just driving down the road. What tipped us off that something weird was happening, though, was when the car cut across, stopped right in front of us, and on the wrong side of the road. There was no way that the message could be misunderstood there. The car door opened and a man stepped out. We couldn't see who, as his headlights were blinding us, but I could have sworn that I heard him laugh. With only a second's hesitation, Will and I ran off the road and into a patch of forest to our right. We tried to stick together through it, but somewhere or somehow, we got separated. I found a bunch of boulders to hide around and waited. I could hear footsteps off in the distance, the voice of the man at the house calling out, "I know you're here, boys!" I slowly peeked my head out from behind the rocks and caught the form of that same man about 30 yards away from me, waving a flashlight around and carrying what looked like a shotgun in his hands. I steadily controlled my breathing, being sure not to panic. I knew that the actives would see that we weren't on the road eventually, and then they'd know that something was up. And that's when I started to scan for Will. I don't know how, but by some miracle, I saw the form of what could have only been Will, hiding behind some brush. I began to worry because I could see that it didn't provide him with enough cover, and the man was slowly getting closer to him. It would only be a matter of time before he caught him, in fact. I began to go through scenarios in my head, imagining that if he caught Will, I'd try and jump him from behind, maybe get that shotgun away from him before he could do anything, and the two of us could easily overpower him. I wanted to do that, but I knew that it would never work. By complete accident, I moved my hand around and felt something that gave me another even better idea. I felt a rock, a heavy, good-sized one, slightly bigger than a baseball. I picked up the thing and, with all my strength, heaved it a good way off in the distance. The rock made quite a bit of noise too, clearly audible through the woods. The man laughed in a maniacal, crazy way that I'll never forget, almost like a grown man trying to imitate the high-pitched squealing laughter of young and excited kids. Once he was a good ways off, I came out from my cover and moved towards Will. I got probably about halfway to him before he saw me. I made a motion for him to follow, and he did without hesitation. The guy must have thought that he was chasing us deeper in, which was damn convenient because we didn't seem to be in any danger after that. We found the guy's car on the road still, the driver's side door still open. I looked inside but cursed when I saw that he was smart enough to take his keys. Then I looked in the back seat and a massive lump formed in my throat. Back there was a massive hunting knife and a bunch of duct tape. Making sure that the guy both couldn't follow us, and so that we'd have a weapon just in case he could, I grabbed the hunting knife and proceeded to slash the man's tires deeply. We made our way down the road that we were supposed to, in order to put some distance between us and the lunatic, making sure to stay off the road. Eventually, we saw the distinct single headlight of our active's car. We ran into the middle of the road, frantically waving our arms like madmen, not letting them pass us. They stopped and got out, clearly worried. We rushed the car and we told him to let us in and we'd explain it. He obliged and continued driving, and we explained everything to him. It was made all the more believable when we showed him the knife and passed by the guy's car, which was still blocking one side of the road. I'd like to just say that I don't blame the Frat. They had no way of knowing that this would happen, and even afterwards, they did not take this lightly. They admitted to the college what they did, and helped us through the process of trying to catch the man, which the police eventually did. They found that he had multiple charges of kidnap, assault, and rape on his background. We in the fraternity didn't get into much trouble after that, although they did have to promise to never do that ritual ever again after that incident. This incident has and will make me forever more cautious around complete strangers. You don't forget about incidents like this, and I still have nightmares about it sometimes. Nightmares where the guy succeeds in catching us.